Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Delivering Local Resilience. I'm glad to share with you that we have a high attendance. We have at the moment about 71 attendees, so happy to have you all here. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you can know how to participate in today's event. You're listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select the telephone in the audio box. As you can see, you have been automatically muted. However, you will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the question box of the control panel. You must send your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect all this and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. We also want to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and that the recording file will be shared with all the participants. On behalf of ICLEI, the World Secretariat, C40, and the World Bank, I would like to thank you for joining us today. This is our third webinar of the series on sustainable and integrated development. This series is part of the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities, GPSC, and it's made possible through the generous funding from the Global Environment Facility, GEF. The Global Platform for Sustainable Cities is a collaborative knowledge platform for cities, networks, and institutions to advance the European sustainability agenda by promoting a common approach to integrated urban planning. The platform brings together participant cities and a wide range of entities working on urban sustainability issues. The GPSC resource team, composed by ICLEI, the World Research Institute, and C40s, is working in a partnership with the World Bank to support the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities and is responsible for promoting knowledge sharing and capacity development among different participant cities through peer-to-peer learning, training academies, access to a range of tools and knowledge projects. My name is Laura Noriega, and I'm a junior officer at the Low Carbon Cities in ICLEI World Secretariat, and I will be moderating today's webinar on delivering local resilience. Our speakers today will be Guilherme Johnston, who is a program manager of the Resilient Cities and ICLEI World Secretariat, and Matteo Bizzotto, who is a junior officer, also working on Resilient Cities team here at ICLEI World Secretariat. Before we want to introduce a little bit of the webinar that is going to take place today. So, delivering local resilience. In today's webinars, our speakers will discuss how resilient cities are better positioned to protect people's lives, secure development, foster an investable environment, and drive positive change. They will provide us an overview of urban-related shocks and stress, the ICLEI approach, resilience infrastructure and urban planning, case studies from and best practices from ICLEI and cities. Before starting, I would like to present you or introduce you to our speakers who will be with us today. So Guilherme Johnston, he supports and guides ICLEI activities in all related facts from resilient city teams. He has experience working from cities-related organizations like Future Cities Catapult and 100% Resilient Cities in London. He had worked for the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office in Brazil and have supported cities and states to improve their urban infrastructure and greening of major events such as the 2014 World Cup and the 2016 Rio Olympics. His experience includes project execution in topics related to waste, to energy, and GHG inventories in Tunisian and Latin American cities. Matteo Bizzotto is part of the ICLEI Resilient Cities team. He is working with us here at the ICLEI World Secretariat, where he manages the communications and co-organizes the yearly Global Forum of Urban Resilience and Adaptation to Climate Change. He also authored and co-edited the Resilient Cities Report 2018. Matteo worked at the press office of the Permanent Missions of Italy in the United Nations in New York, and he holds a master's degree in the International and European Politics and a bachelor in Business and Management. So thank you very much, Matteo and Guilherme, for joining us today and for giving us a presentation in today's webinar, Delivering Local Resilience. So I would like to give the word to Guilherme.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you all for joining. We really have a good attendance today. I can see here more around 80 people, so that's really great, and really demonstrate the importance of delivering local resilience and how we can definitely help cities to be implementing resilience strategies and resilience policies. So that's very important for us, and thank you again for joining. So I would like to start with just a brief presentation of what we'll be discussing today. So first of all, we will start with setting the scene, talking a little bit about ICLEI and our work and some of our publications. Then Matteo will follow up with some best practices from some of our members, and also some of our projects. And we will finish talking about some of ICLEI methodologies, which we are currently developing, and the aim at supporting cities globally to deliver local resilience. So I think we can start now with setting the scene. So what's ICLEI approach and the need for local resilience. So it's a very large group that we're hosting today. So I'm not sure if all of you know exactly what ICLEI do. I'm pretty sure most of you do, but just as a brief introduction, ICLEI is a global organization created around 29 years ago, initially to represent local governments at the United Nations climate change negotiations. But right now, we have more than 1,700 cities around the world that are our members, and we work together with them in projects in a variety of areas. In addition to that, we have 22 offices also in every corner of the globe. So at our Congress, last World Congress in Montreal, we have defined 5 pathways for ICLEI, which are actually you can see in the presentation. So low emission development, everything that's related to climate mitigation, nature-based development, equitable and people-centered development, circular development, so everything related to circular economy and all related areas, and resilience development, which is the area I work with alongside Matteo. So the objective of these areas is definitely to promote and support our cities, our members, and cities globally to deliver their own policies in these areas. So in terms of resilience development, ICLEI, I mean, there are various definitions of resilience, as you know. So for us, resilient cities is a city that can anticipate, prevent, absorb, and recover from shocks and stresses. So it can be natural shocks such as major flooding, earthquake, drought, or others, or I mean other stresses that cities can have, such as unemployment, issues related to how to cope with increasing migration, aging population, digital. So resilience really can touch upon a variety of sectors. And so for us, and I think this is a common ground for definition for resilience, we try to help cities to be prepared in order to address these different shocks and stresses that they have to face. And we also like to work into these urban systems, what you call this integrated urban systems. So we think that when you look at cities, everything is definitely interconnected. So there are the different connections between cities, regional governments, local governments, and I mean rural areas. So for example, in terms of food systems, how urban is connected to rural, who provide the food system, and how these linkages can be prepared for potential shocks and stresses that they can face. So I think we also look at this interconnectivity as a very important area for our work. And when you talk about resilience infrastructure, is also key to take into account that we really see that they have to be robust. So how can they should be able to address different and shocks and stresses at the same time, but they can also have to be flexible, so they can temporarily or permanently adapt to some emergency situations they have to face, and also redundant, which is the way that they can accommodate different disruption after something, a major shock can occur. So that's why we see this as a spider web, the way that resilience infrastructure in a urban system can be seen, and that's how we try to look at it, and that's how we try to make sure our cities are prepared to address the different shocks and stresses that they are facing in exponential way, as we can see from recent major weather events or other types of man-made activities that are happening. Yeah, and also ICLEI, we have developed some different reports and different activities related to resilience. And one interesting report that I would like to mention is something that we released the end of last year, which is something called Data Speaks Louder Than Word, where we have through our carbon center of data information from cities that we have here at ICLEI, we managed to gather a series of data and also evaluate where are cities in terms of resilience, and where are the ones they need, what are the needs that they have to address this type of issues. So through this report, we found out that natural disasters, they cost cities around $250 billion per year, so it's massive. And we also realized that right now around 70% of the resources that for resilience actions come from local governments, and we know that local governments, they don't necessarily have the resources to fund and then to implement these massive resilience projects they need to implement. So I think through this publication, we really raised our attention and confirm what we've been saying before, that cities really need resources, they really need to build capacity, and they really need to be better prepared to face shocks and stresses related to resilience. And you know that the global need for urban infrastructure investment is over 4.5 trillion dollars. So it's something that we really needs to be addressed, and we need to help cities to develop these projects and also find innovative ways of financing different projects. So I just wanted to briefly mention this report, and also refer to other activities that we here at ICLEI have in terms of helping cities to finance climate-related projects and resilience-related projects, such as this something called the TAP, which is also a way of cities that present projects to us, and together we try to help them in looking for funding and working together with multilateral institutions. So just going back to the report, so we can see that data matters. With the data, we have seen that there is great need for financial support for cities, and this even more as 60% of the expected urbanized areas by 2030 are yet to be built. So there is a great opportunity as well for this new infrastructure development to be done, taking resilience into consideration, and making sure that they are prepared for different shocks and stresses that, unfortunately, because of climate change and other, they will have to face. Thank you. So this was just a brief introduction from our work and the work we are currently undertaking in resilience. But now I think let's go to the practical side and see some good practices from ICLEI members and also some of our projects that we've been implementing. So I'd like to pass the microphone to my colleague Matteo, who will follow up the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Guilherme, and thank you, Laura, for the lovely presentations. So yes, as Guilherme said in this section, I will introduce two cities-led case studies and two ICLEI-led projects about resilience building. And in the end, we'll have a quick overview on the lessons learned that will then input Guilherme's final presentations on the ICLEI methodologies, which are basically management processes to build sustainable and resilience development. So the first city-led case study is from QUELIMANE, a seaport city in Mozambique with roughly 350,000 inhabitants. Now, due to its coastal position and its landscape characteristics, QUELIMANE is extremely prone to floods during the rainy season. And in this case study, we will see how the city leveraged nature-based solutions to successfully and cost-effectively respond to extreme weather events. Now, the challenges before QUELIMANE are not unfamiliar to developing countries, namely unprecedented urbanization, population growth, and industrial expansions. And all these has worsened the loss of the mangrove ecosystems throughout the country. Just as a term of reference, the planet is seeing an annual mangrove habitat loss of 1 to 2%, whereas Mozambique's annual loss rate amounts to almost 4%. And unsurprisingly, the effects of this habitat loss have already been felt. Flood and cyclones alone submerged part of Mozambique in 2000, 2001, and 2015, and not to mention the tragic situation the country is experiencing right now due to the cyclone Idai that struck early this month. So in partnership with USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development, QUELIMANE engaged in strategies intended to restore mangrove habitats, prevent future losses of these mangroves, and build local expertise in resilience practices. So first, various stakeholders group explored the questions, why are mangroves so important in our case? And the answer was because they have dense root systems that can break the waves and they trap the sediment from rivers and the land. And these, of course, hinders the soil's erosion and stabilize the shorelines, which also lowers the risk of flooding and protects the communities and houses behind them. For example, a 2004 study in Southeast Asia showed that 80% of homes in unprotected areas were destroyed after a tornado struck, whereas in areas protected by the mangroves, only 7% of these homes were damaged. So, of course, with this knowledge, government officials started to define goals and strategies and deadlines for these mangroves restoration projects. And specialized botanists train community leaders on the best environmental practices for mangrove restorations. And then in a pyramid-like shape, these community leaders also train the community themselves so that each participant, each community member was also a participant in this project. They replanted mangroves in accordance to the training that they received, and they also got a daily amount of approximately $2.5. And here on the right, for example, you can see a sample picture of a mangrove habitat restoration. Now, the outcomes of this plan have firstly seen a deflection of potential investment toward only gray infrastructure. Why is that a good thing? Because gray infrastructure alone cannot self-adjust to emerging conditions. It only provides a specific protection without the added benefit like carbon storage or fish habitat or simply aesthetic values. And in addition, gray infrastructure neither addresses the causes of disaster risk, nor does it prevent the emergence of new risks. To this extent, a cost-benefit analysis actually found that fully restored mangrove habitats would see an annual benefit of over $5,000 in terms of fish production and aquaculture. And also, since QUELIMANE worked alongside a diverse group of stakeholders, the city was able to build a wealth of local knowledge in resilience strategies. Just an example, the local university, which played a key role in identifying the best practices for mangrove replanting, is now becoming a hub of this knowledge, and are now looking at ways to spread this local expertise. Last, the mayor of QUELIMANE, Manuel de Araújo, that you see here in the picture, he also promoted resilience efforts within government channels and has committed the administrations in resilient efforts. And he is now serving as the ICLEI Resilient Cities portfolio holder. Now, this is another city-led case study from Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. Copenhagen is a city defined by water. It faces the strait connecting the North Sea to the Baltic Sea, and throughout history, Copenhagen has flourished as a maritime port. However, while its relationship with water has brought economic successes, it also poses serious threats. And one of these threats is, of course, flooding, both due to rainfall and proximity to the sea. And to address this, Copenhagen engaged in each flood-prone neighborhood in a hybrid blue-green infrastructure, which was tailored to the characteristic and to the needs of each neighborhood. This has been helping to address flooding, while also creating a strategic and inclusive approach for a long-term resilience. So everything started on the 2nd July 2011, when a cloudburst fell on Copenhagen, and in just 2 hours, the city was left under a meter of water. The sewer system was, of course, under pressure and unable to cope with the amount of water. So it released a mixture of flood and wastewater into the buildings across the city. Approximately 1 billion euros were insurance claims, and larger estimation indicate around 1.5 billion euros in socio-economic losses. So, of course, these huge impacts both on society and on the economy drove Copenhagen to engage in a cloudburst mitigation plan. Now, the aim was to identify the parts of the city most at risk from future cloudburst events and to propose solutions to increase the city's resilience to flooding. But interestingly, in this plan, city leaders also saw an opportunity for urban development, urban improvement. So instead of just increasing the sewage capacity through underground pipes, Copenhagen actually decided to keep the water on the surface and control it from there, what is known as plant control flooding. How did it do that? Each neighbor was engaged since the very early stages, so they could provide their inputs. And in doing that, the adaptation plan was shaped and was translated in a general improved green spaces that both served as recreational spaces and as water retention ponds. As you can see in this image on the right, the roads too have been adapted to provide surface level storage, and they also kept a dry lane to maintain some degree of movement across the city, so not to disrupt everything completely. Then, of course, existing lakes were also proposed to be lowered so that they could provide a central storage area for flood waters. And another important point is that the city calculated the cost of doing nothing, of inaction, against the risk of future disasters and of increased intense weather events. Outcomes. So probably the most significant thing to look at in Copenhagen is the business case approach rather than the focus on the risk. Why? Because Copenhagen successfully demonstrated that dealing with cloudburst management in an integrated way was a good idea. In effect, one of the clearer benefits for the city is that this network of blue-green infrastructure somehow replicates the natural post-rainfall water cycle that was disrupted by urban development. And of course, since a large part of this rainwater remains on the surface, the sewage blockages can be more easily identified and managed, and the overall consequences of failure are also reduced. Alongside flood relief functions, these resilience measures also have positive impacts on the real estate value. And this is a very important point for cities, since higher real estate value generally translate in higher taxation returns to the city from those properties. Last, the Copenhagen Adaptation Plan contributed to the livability of the city by increasing green areas. And that, of course, had positive effects on biodiversity and on urban cooling. For these case studies, we would also like to acknowledge Lykke Leonardsen, who's the Copenhagen Head of Program for Resilience and Sustainable City Solution, who is also serving as our program committee member in the advisory board of the Global Resilient Cities Congress, which is held every year here in Bonn, Germany. But we will touch upon the Congress later. Now, let's dig into a couple of ICLEI-led projects on resilience. So the first one is this Smart Mature Resilience. It's a European project that brought researchers and cities together to develop a suite of 5 digital tools, which are included in overarching umbrella guideline that supports city decision makers in building resilience. The project established the European Resilience Management Guideline, which is a blueprint for planning and implementing resilience building actions, including the use of 5 tools. Now, these tools are the Resilience Maturity Model, which is an online database of recommended policies and helps defining a city stage of resilience maturity, so namely starting point, moderate, advanced, robust, or vertebrate. After defining that, the city can try out different policy combinations through the city resilience dynamic tools, and they can simulate the effects of these policy combinations year by year. The resilience building policies tool also complements the maturity model with a database of case studies from European cities, and cities can also upload their own case studies. Following the risk systematicity questionnaire, which helps identifying and prioritizing risk scenarios. And it does that through a list of actions aimed at reducing the risk in each scenario. And last, the Resilience Information Portal Handbook, which supports the creation of an online and possibly user-friendly platform to promote and spread the process of building resilience. Now, this portal can also just complement a city's existing communication system, and it complements that through a public information exchange mechanism to exchange information like extreme weather warnings, risk maps, hazard updates that should help raising public awareness on the vulnerability of the city. Now, this project ended last year and had a concrete impact of some of the European cities. So if you're interested on knowing more about the project, the details about the tools, as also the report mentioned before by Guilherme. In the end of this presentation, we will have a slide with all the links that you can consult. This last ICLEI-led project that I'm explaining, it's about how to strengthen resilience in China. Now, of course, Chinese cities, as hopefully all the cities in the world, are starting to include resilience into urban planning procedures. And therefore, they are actively seeking international cooperation and benchmarking opportunities to reduce their disaster vulnerability. And here is where ICLEI comes in. ICLEI East Asia, in collaboration with UNHCR, are organizing a series of capacity building workshops in China. For those who do not know UNHCR, it's the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction. These workshops are structured in sessions about the current trends in East Asia, for example, China and Japan. Then they have an overview of global perspective and best practices, some of the most relevant resilience tools from ICLEI and UNHCR, and a final session of group discussions, feedbacks, and inputs. The topics range from resilient infrastructure and urban planning to climate risk modeling, and from ecological conservation and nature-based solutions to citizen engagement and peer learning. And peer learning is generally an overlooked aspect, but just an example of its importance. Participants in our latest workshop in the city of Zhuhai in China, they found that the flood management experiences of another ICLEI member, the Japanese city of Toyama, was particularly relevant to Zhuhai's needs and Zhuhai's local context. Now, why is this helpful? Because now city officials in Zhuhai can take inspiration from Toyama's resilience plans, and above all, they can already see which measures proved to be a success and which needed to be adjusted or perhaps avoided completely. Going back to the workshop is a modular part of a larger project aimed at strengthening capacities for resilience in China. And in the case of Zhuhai that we mentioned, the city's official, for example, visited ICLEI members in Europe for peer learning, and the success of this initial engagement convinced Zhuhai to expand the collaboration with ICLEI Asia through an even deeper systematic evaluation and international exchange. On a related note, actually, other examples of these peer learning opportunities include the upcoming Resilient Cities Asia Pacific, which will take place in New Delhi, India, from the 15th to 17th of April, and the Global Resilient Cities 2019, taking place in Bonn, here in Germany, from the 26th to the 28th of June. But Guilherme will touch upon those a little bit more in the end. Now, let's wrap up. So, some lessons learned. Local communities are a source of invaluable knowledge, and whenever possible should be leveraged in all phases of the project. For example, in the case of Copenhagen, we've seen that local communities contributed to the design of the neighborhood, which was tailored to their own characteristics, to their own needs, and to their own priorities. And these also allowed these communities to have a sense of ownership on the project. Different stakeholders provide complementing perspective, expertise, and solutions. As we've seen in the case of QUELIMANE, it was actually the researchers and botanists who taught communities and cities officials about the importance of mangrove growth and how to restore them. Reliable data and scientific researches are key for sound policies. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, this point is not immediately recognizable, but I think it's quite fundamental. Infrastructural modernization requires administrative modernization. What does that mean? when, for example, when Copenhagen engaged directly with the neighborhoods and its communities, they had to get input from them, and they had to co-design together flood-proof solutions. So just for doing this, the city administration had to remove all the red tapes that would impede or even slow down the project coordination and the direct communications with the citizens. Nature-based solutions can be more robust, flexible, and cost-effective than built work alternatives. Now, we have seen how QUELIMANE predominantly relied on green rather than gray infrastructure and the benefits that came with it. And in effect, USAID found that the financial value of mangrove restoration over a 50 years period amounted to roughly 33,000 US dollars per hectare, which contrasts sharply with the economic analysis of an earthen dike alternative, which reporting an annual net loss of 34,000 US dollar per hectare. So of course, this is clearly an indication that the initial investment tends to be more than pay off for itself in the long run, both throughout risk mitigation and, in the case of QUELIMANE, increased agricultural production. And this connects to the next lessons learned. The cost of resilient action is often less than the cost of resilience inaction, as long as one can prove it. So this is another crucial point, and it's still under discussion in the resilience debate. Now, cities tend to realize the importance of prevention over reconstruction only after a disaster struck. And this mainly occurs since there are rare estimations of the damages of uncertain events. But once cities actually do have those estimations, they can make a financial case to push for preventive measures. Generally, are obviously much more cost effective than the post-disaster reconstruction, and they make logical sense. Investment in general or targeted land improvements can generate capital investment in other nearby locations, further increasing the value of that land, and as we said before, the return on taxation for the city. So I think it should be a priority for the city to link resilience intervention to the development of the city as much as Copenhagen did. It wasn't just a flooding proof measure. It was a more, let's say, a more an approach that looked at the development of the city itself, which was flood proofing, but it also entailed elements of greening, of social resilience, also providing social spaces for the people, and so on. And something that we've seen through the years that this is again another crucial point, but here I will only mention it because it could potentially open up a Pandora vase. Think local, aim international. Think local because each context has its own specificities, be it physical features, local culture, tradition, and so on. And each resilience intervention needs, of course, a certain degree of tailoring, because you do not just want to impose a project from above. You actually want to make sure it is adapted to the local context. Aim international because most of the times the projects tend to be very small and conservative due to the city's limited resources generally. However, these small scale projects are not attractive for investors because they have an higher risk and smaller returns if compared to bigger projects. So it is worth for the city to explore larger and possibly scientific-based resilience measures, and to a later stage work to secure multiple funding sources. Now, this one was my last slide. I'm giving back the word to Guilherme that will touch upon the ICLEI methodologies. Guilherme, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Matteo. That was very, very interesting. I mean, to see the different case studies from our members, like QUELIMANE in Copenhagen, and also some of our projects. And So as a continuation from what we've been discussing, I think it's worth mentioning. Of course, we don't have the time to go in detail, but it's just worth mentioning that ICLEI, we are currently developing different methodologies in order to help our cities to deliver climate mitigation projects, but now certainly also resilience. As you can see, it's definitely a priority for all of our cities. So I think just to remind everyone, I think this idea of creating these methodologies came from a program that we have called the Green Climate Cities, which was born in 2016 and focused mainly on climate mitigation. But right now we are also focusing on climate resilience and resilience in general. So I think that's important to say the difference and the need that we see that cities are facing, and that's why they are asking us to also develop this methodology specifically on resilience. So as you can see from the slide, we try to use a system that can help cities to incorporate lessons learned, and also can include development stages that can be flexible, iterative, and modular. So by saying that, we are saying that we are trying to work with cities that are in different stages of the implementation of their projects and different activities. So we want to make sure that we can work with every city in the world, be them a large city that already has, for example, a resilience strategy, or another city that is just starting to develop this process. So we really try to focus on these different types of cities. So our approach is key. It enables cities to definitely identify these different elements that they have, and then we try to integrate them into the development of the urban policies, plans, and different processes that cities have. So the idea is to use the methodology really to help them to have effective policies that can be implemented, measurable, and verifiable. That's why we also have this monitoring and reporting system, and that we suggest cities to equally implement. And just specifically on the resilience methodology, we've been working quite hard. I mean, now to integrate the different aspects of resilience, because of course some people, and even because of ICLEI's history, we have done a lot of work related to climate, climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. But we know that resilience is not only that. So what we are trying to address right now with this exclusive resilience methodology is to incorporate all the different aspects that cities may need to face in terms of shocks and stresses. So it can be terrorist attack, can be we had some questions here on epidemics, so this is definitely included. So the idea is to make sure we include the different aspects of resilience into one single methodology, and that we work together with the city to make sure they have the most effective policies and strategies to help to deliver their resilience related projects. And we really the idea is to also help them to develop bankable and projects that can be presented to the different donors or development banks, or the ones that can fund these projects. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the most one of the most difficult issues for cities, how they can develop bankable projects and also fund them. Yeah, so I think this is just to briefly mention some of the ideas of the methodology. It's being developed, and we hope to launch the methodologies, mainly the ones on green climate cities, at our Resilient Cities conference here in Bonn between the 26th and 28th of June. And for the resilience methodology, the conference will also be an opportunity for them, for all cities and other stakeholders that are here, to test the methodology and see how we could, if it's effective, and what we can change to improve it. So taking this opportunity, I'll definitely like to invite you all to come to the Resilient Cities Congress, which will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of our event. And in this event, we will be focusing a lot on how cities can deliver local resilience. So we'll be working together with the private sector, development banks, national governments, and local governments, really focusing on helping them to design and then implement effective resilience-related projects and activities. So just before we end, I'd just like to invite you all to really participate if we can. And the idea of the Congress is then to develop further projects and activities globally that we can implement together with all of you. So thank you very much. I think that was just to briefly mention about the Congress, and also just to mention the different co-patrons for the Congress. So we have Patricia Espinosa, which is the Executive Secretary of United Nations Climate Change Framework Convention, and she'll be participating of the Congress. We also will have Mami Mitsutori from UNISDR, Maimona Sharif from UN Habitat, Mayor of Bonn, who's also our president, and the representatives from the German Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development. So just to say, we're really looking forward to have you all here in Bonn for the Congress. Yeah, and I think now we should have some time for question and answers. But first, I'd like to I'll pass to Laura, who can follow up. But thank you very much so far for participating.
Thank you, Guilherme and Matteo, for really nice and comprehensive presentation. We have some questions from the audience, and actually, Joseph Hill, he made a question regarding what is grey infrastructure. He actually answered himself as a definition of green infrastructure are engineering projects that use concrete and steel. Green infrastructure are projects that depend on plants and ecosystem services, but they might be totally constructed and artificial. So maybe Guilherme or Matteo, you want to complement on what is the definition for great infrastructure?
Yes. So yes, he basically did reply himself. Great infrastructure are those man-made, generally cemented infrastructure. In the case of QUELIMANE that I mentioned, that the alternative was to either build, let's say, a kind of wall near the water to protect the shore, or even better, to just put like a sand or earth dike to protect the coastlines from the waves, from erosion, and so on. And that was, of course, just putting earth there, so that it's a man-made intervention, and it doesn't adapt. There's nothing alive there, let's say. So that is what I meant when I mentioned the green infrastructure there. But for example, I'm thinking now in Bangkok, if I remember correctly, they also used nature-based solutions to filter the water and have nearly potable water through some plants. So they had this huge reservoir of dirty water that the plants would filter themselves. That is nature-based solutions. The classic filtration system that you would have in a city, which is built by men and it has nothing, let's say, alive in there, that is great infrastructure. So that's the difference. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you, Matteo. We had also another question from Esteban De Filia. I did not see epidemics among the disasters shown in Guilherme's presentation. What is the reason for this? Guilherme, can you
Yep.
build up on
Yeah.
that?
Sure. Thank you. And of course, and I think as I said at the beginning, we for us, I think resilience, we should incorporate different aspects that can affect a city, and certainly epidemics is a major shock that can come, or it can be a stress. I mean, depending on the situation, but it's definitely something that cities need to address, and they certainly need to be prepared. So I can just going back to my even from my home country. So in Brazil, recently they have this issue with the Zika virus, and cities in the northeast of Brazil, like Recife, they had to deal with the situation that they were not prepared for that. So I mean, they had to really react in a ways that they couldn't cope, and so I think cities definitely need to take epidemics into consideration, and unfortunately now we are seeing a growth in this type of issues, even now also in Mozambique with that cyclone Idai. Now cities have to deal with cholera epidemics and others. So it certainly should be part of a resilience strategy, this ways of how you can manage this type of epidemics, and definitely it's included in when we talk to cities and we try to deliver to help them with the resilience strategies. Thank you.
I
Thank
see
you.
that there are some questions regarding the one question regarding the strengthening resilience in China workshops, but I think the time's almost up, so I would just refer to the links that they are in the next slide, but we will share the PowerPoint with your participants, and you can have a look at the links there. And for more information, you can find both the website there and also the contact person at the ICLEI Station Secretariat. And a quick one that I'm seeing now that involves the insurance sector. How is ICLEI engaged with the insurance industry to help cities retrieve data on loss and damage that could support comprehensive climate risk management? So we are working with the insurance sector. For example, in the latest 2018 Resilient Cities, we had some consultation sessions with insurance sector representative and the PSI, UNEP PSI, which is like a network of insurers, roughly speaking. And we design sort of guidelines, let's say, for insurers to approach cities. That guidelines was launched at the ICLEI 2018 World Congress in Montreal. And this year at Resilient Cities 2019 here in Bonn, we will also have another consultation sessions, because what we want to do is that take those goals, take those that framework that we created, and start implementing it. Because as Guilherme said at the beginning, the goal of this year now is to really start and implementing the resilience delivery.
Thank you, Matteo. Thank you, Guilherme. I see that we have many other questions. Don't worry, these questions will be addressed. We will contact and send the answers to you via email. If you have further questions, you can always contact Guilherme or Matteo. Here are his contact data. But we want to consider the time of everyone, and I think we're running out of time. So I want to thank Guillermo and Matteo for your presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we will appreciate if you will complete it and provide us with the feedback. The recording of today's webinar will be able at the GPSC website also at www.thegpsc.org. We would also like to extend our welcome to the local governments interested to participate in the GPSC Per Exchange component at the Resilient Cities Asia Pacific in New Delhi on the 16th of April, and the Resilient Cities Annual Forum in Bonn on the 27th of June. These Per Exchange workshops will be focused on access to climate finance. Finally, on behalf of the GPSC research team, I would like to thank you all for your attendance once again. and wish you a great rest of your day. Goodbye.